Picture this. You're cruising at 33,000 feet in a military aircraft. Suddenly, the nose drops. Hard. You're weightless, coffee floating, papers everywhere. And nobody, not even the pilots, knows why. Keep watching, because what caused this near disaster is so absurd. You won't believe it's real. September 9, 2014. RAF Voyager, 333. A massive Airbus A330 is somewhere over the Black Sea carrying 198 people. This isn't your standard military cargo run. Civilian contractors, and a film crew from the BBC making a documentary about Britain's new air-to-air refueling tankers. You know, the kind of planes that pump fuel into fighter jets mid-flight. Very cutting edge, very sophisticated, very about to go horribly wrong. The Voyager program was supposed to be Britain's pride and joy. The RAF had just phased out their aging VC-10 and TriStar tankers, replacing them with these state-of-the-art Airbus conversions. Shiny, modern, efficient. The kind of aircraft you show off to make other air forces jealous. And that's exactly what they were doing, showing off. The BBC crew was there to film everything. B-roll of the refueling boom extending. Shots of crew members looking professional and capable. The whole marketing package. Flight 333 was heading from RAF Brize Norton in England to Camp Bastion in Afghanistan. A routine deployment flight. 11 hours of mostly boring flying over Europe, Turkey, and eventually into Afghan airspace. The kind of flight where the biggest excitement is usually someone hogging the last chocolate bar from the meal service. But someone had a camera. And not just any camera. A DSLR. You know those hefty professional cameras with the interchangeable lenses that make you look like you know what you're doing at family gatherings? The BBC crew had been filming all day, capturing footage of the refueling equipment, the cockpit, the crew going about their business. Everything was going exactly to plan. Until it wasn't. At around 4:20 p.m. local time, one of the cameramen was shooting in the cockpit. He wanted some dramatic close-up shots of the instrument panel. You've seen this footage a million times in aviation documentaries. Dials, screens, pilots looking stoic and professional. Riveting stuff. So he leaned forward, camera in hand, trying to get the perfect angle. And then the camera brushed against something. The slightest touch. A momentary contact with what's called the access panel rotary control switch. Sounds important, right? That's because it is. This innocuous little switch controls which pilot has access to the aircraft's primary flight display and navigation data. In normal circumstances, nobody's touching this thing mid-flight. It's set on the ground, and then you leave it alone. But a camera housing hard plastic and metal made contact. Just for a second, the switch rotated. Not much, maybe 30 degrees. But in aircraft systems, that's enough. Instantly, the autopilot disconnected. The aircraft's brain basically had a stroke trying to figure out what was happening. And when aircraft computers get confused, they default to the safest option they can think of. In this case, the safe option was to pitch the nose down. Hard. Within seconds, the Voyager dropped into a 30-degree nose-down attitude. For context, a normal descent is around 3 degrees. Everyone not strapped in went airborne. And I mean properly airborne. People hit the ceiling. Equipment flew forward. The BBC crew's carefully organized filming gear became projectiles. 9 people were injured immediately. Some hit their heads on overhead compartments. Coffee, papers, cameras, bags, everything loose in the cabin was suddenly obeying Newton's laws with extreme enthusiasm. In the cockpit, the pilots were trying to figure out what the hell just happened. 1 second, they're cruising normally. The next, the autopilot's off. Alarms are screaming, and the plane's trying to introduce itself to the Black Sea at high speed. The captain pulled back on the stick. Nothing. The aircraft wasn't responding the way it should. Here's where it gets worse. After about 9 seconds of this terrifying nosedive, except now people who just picked themselves up off the ceiling got to experience it all over again. This time, 3 more people were hurt. The pilots were fighting the aircraft, trying to understand why their perfectly good plane had suddenly decided to audition for a roller coaster. You might be thinking, well, just turn off the camera, right? Move it away from the switch? Here's the problem. Nobody knew the camera was the cause. Think about it. You're a pilot. Your aircraft just pitched violently downward twice. You're running through your emergency checklists. Engine failure? No. Engines are fine. Control surface jam? No. Controls are responding. Hydraulic failure? Negative. Computer malfunction? Maybe. But which one? The last thing you're thinking is that a BBC cameraman's DSLR is trying to kill everyone on board. It took the crew several minutes to stabilize the aircraft and ensure it wasn't going to nosedive again. By then, the damage was done. 12 people injured, some seriously. The flight continued to Afghanistan, but the investigation that followed would uncover one of the most bizarre aircraft incidents in modern aviation history. Let's talk about that switch for a second. The access panel rotary control switch. In the Voyager, like many Airbus aircraft, this switch determines which side of the cockpit has control authority over certain systems. It's part of the aircraft's redundancy design. If one pilot's displays fail, you can switch control to the other side. Smart engineering. Except nobody thought about what happens when a camera accidentally rotates it mid-flight. The switch is located right on the center console between the two pilot seats. Easy to reach, which is good for intentional use. Also easy to accidentally bump with a large camera, which is very bad for everyone's continued survival. The flight control computers received conflicting information about which pilot station was active. The autopilot, sensing something was wrong, disconnected. Standard procedure. But then the flight control laws, the software rules that govern how the aircraft responds to pilot inputs, degraded from normal law to direct law. For non-aviation nerds, here's what that means. The computer protects you from doing stupid things. You can't overstress the aircraft. You can't stall it. The computer won't let you. It's like driving a car with all the safety assists on. But in direct law, the computer steps back. You get raw control. What you input is what happens. No safety net. It's like suddenly driving a 1960s muscle car when you thought you were in a modern sedan. The problem is, the Voyager's flight control system didn't just degrade to direct law. It also commanded a nose-down pitch trim. Why? Because the computer thought the aircraft was in an unusual attitude and tried to correct it. Except it corrected it in the wrong direction. The result was the plane diving toward the ground while the pilots fought to understand why their inputs weren't doing what they expected. After landing in Afghanistan, the aircraft was immediately grounded. The UK Military Aviation Authority launched an investigation. So did Airbus. So did the RAF. Everyone wanted to know what the hell happened. Initial theories ranged from software bugs to hardware failures to electromagnetic interference. It took months to piece together. Investigators reviewed the flight data recorder. They examined the cockpit voice recorder. They interviewed the crew. They tested the switch. They recreated the scenario in simulators. And eventually, they watched the BBC footage. On camera. The moment the camera made contact with the switch, the smoking gun was literally filmed by the thing that caused the problem. The BBC crew had inadvertently documented their own near-death experience in high definition. The official report, when it finally came out, was damning. Not for the pilots. They did everything right. Not for the maintenance crews. The aircraft was functioning as designed. The blame fell on what's called inadequate risk assessment. Nobody had considered that a camera could cause this kind of catastrophic failure. The RAF had allowed filming in the cockpit without properly assessing the risks. Airbus got involved too. They issued a service bulletin, basically a strongly worded letter to every A330 operator saying, "Hey, maybe don't let people wave cameras around near critical flight controls." The switch was eventually redesigned with a protective cover in later variants. Problem solved, right? Well, yes and no. The incident exposed a broader issue in modern aviation. We've made aircraft so reliable, so automated, that we sometimes forget how fragile the systems can be. A touch of a switch, a momentary contact. That's all it took to send 198 people into a life-threatening situation. The injured passengers recovered, though some dealt with long-term effects. Broken ribs heal, but the psychological impact of thinking you're about to die in a plane crash, that sticks with you. Several of the injured filed claims. The RAF settled quietly. The kind of settlement where everyone signs non-disclosure agreements, and nobody talks about it at parties. The BBC documentary about RAF tankers? It aired, but they edited out the part where their camera nearly killed everyone. Understandable. Not great for ratings to admit your film crew almost caused a mass casualty event. The footage exists somewhere in an archive, probably labeled "Do Not Use" in all caps with several exclamation points. RAF Voyager 333 is still flying, by the way. After a thorough inspection and some modifications, it was returned to service. It's been on hundreds of flights since then. No more incidents. No more cameras allowed in the cockpit during flight, which seems like a policy that should have existed from the start. But here we are. The whole thing raises an interesting question about modern aviation. We trust these machines with our lives. We board planes assuming that everything's been thought through. Every switch, every system, every possible failure mode has been considered and planned for. Something so simple, so mundane, slips through. A camera, a switch, 9 seconds of terror. That's all it took. Now you might think this is a one-off, a freak accident that'll never happen again. But aviation history is full of these absurd incidents. In 1983, Air Canada Flight 143 ran out of fuel mid-flight because someone confused pounds and kilograms during refueling. The Gimli glider, they called it. The pilots landed the thing on an abandoned airstrip that had been turned into a drag racing track. No one died, but still, a math error nearly killed everyone. In 2000, an Alaska Airlines flight lost its horizontal stabilizer because of a jammed jack screw. The investigation found that maintenance crews had been greasing it with the wrong lubricant for years. The plane went into an inverted dive. 88 people died. Wrong grease. That's all it took. In 2009, Air France Flight 447 crashed into the Atlantic Ocean, killing all 228 people on board. The cause? Ice crystals blocked the pitot tubes, giving the flight computer bad airspeed data. The autopilot disconnected. The pilots, confused and disoriented, stalled the aircraft and flew it into the ocean. Ice crystals. In a plane designed to fly through any weather, the point is, aviation is a game of margins. They plan for engine failures, computer malfunctions, hydraulic leaks, bird strikes, lightning, turbulence, and 1,000 other things. But they can't plan for everything. Sometimes the failure mode is so specific, so weird, that nobody saw it coming. A camera touching a switch is one of those things. What makes the Voyager incident particularly fascinating is that it happened in 2014. This isn't the early days of aviation when planes were held together with string and prayers. This is modern aviation, fly-by-wire systems, redundant computers, decades of safety improvements. And yet, a DSLR nearly brought the whole thing down. The human factor is always the wild card. You can engineer the perfect aircraft, but you can't engineer perfect humans. Someone will always do something unexpected. Lean the wrong way, touch the wrong switch, make the wrong assumption. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Cockpit access is now heavily restricted. If you're not essential to the operation of the aircraft, you're not getting in there. And if you absolutely must be in the cockpit, you're getting a thorough briefing on what not to touch, which frankly, should be rule number 1 anyway. The BBC learned their lesson too. They still make aviation documentaries, but now they're much more careful about where they point their cameras. Turns out, don't crash the plane is a pretty important consideration when filming. And the rest of us? We learned that the next time you're on a flight and wondering what could possibly go wrong, the answer is anything. Literally anything. A camera, a switch, 9 seconds. That's the difference between a routine flight and a disaster. The incident became a case study in aviation safety courses. And somewhere in a training manual, there's probably a line that says, in very serious language, do not allow cameras near flight critical controls. The most dangerous thing on an aircraft isn't an engine fire or a systems failure. Sometimes it's just a cameraman trying to get the perfect shot.